Welcome, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Happy July 4th week. I hope that you are hopefully taking some time this week to relax a little bit. I know you're joining a webinar, but other than that, I hope you're taking a little bit of time to rest and relax. We're going to go ahead and jump into our session today, which is on grammar and conventions for English 1 through 4. So let's go ahead and jump on in. Starting with our housekeeping, Brenna is going to drop in the chat our landing page today, as well as our attendance. And as you take a moment to fill both of those out, we're also going to do some introduction. So for those of you who have not had a chance to meet, hello, my name is Casey Prince Harvey. I am Education Associate for Humanities in the Office of Assessment and Standards on the standards side, and I work particularly close with our ELA team because that is my background, is teaching high school English, so I'm very excited to be here with you today, and I'm joined by my two teammates. I have Mandy Hawker, who is our Elementary ELA Education Associate, and then Brenna McCormick, who is our Secondary ELA Education Associate, and they are going to be behind the scenes troubleshooting, letting people in, dropping links, helping to monitor the chat. So if you have a question or a need for something at any point, feel free to drop that in the chat, or you can directly message one of them and they should be able to help you out. But I would love to hear about who we have with us today. So if you don't mind sharing some introductions, if you would add into the chat your name, where you're coming to us from, and do you have something exciting or relaxing planned for this 4th of July week? I would love to hear what you have going on. Hopefully you're doing something to relax. Hey, Mary, not just keeping cool. Yep. Oh, Peach Festival. That sounds fun. Denise, your husband is, turning 50. That is exciting. Hanging out with family. Husband's 60th birthday. Okay. Jessica, that is a huge family reunion. I have never seen that many people at a family reunion. That is wild. I see spending some time with family, daughter's 9th birthday, enjoying some time with friends, some fireworks. Ooh, party with family in the mountains. That sounds excellent. Oh, color coded. That sounds about right. Yep, Brenna is going to the beach. She's taking her son for the first time, which is exciting. Ice cream churn off. That sounds awesome. Do you get to like choose different flavors, and is it like a contest for like who makes the best ice cream? Because that sounds like something I might want to go to. Avoiding school until next week. Fair enough. Absolutely. Friends cookout. Okay. On vacation with family. Just bought a house. Congratulations. That's so exciting. Mandy's headed to the lake house for boating and a golf cart parade. Okay, Amber, I see it's a contest for the best ice cream. The beach would be so great this week. I do not have anything nearly as exciting planned. I think if we could just grill something and then maybe go see some fireworks or something like that. That's about as exciting as it's going to get for us. Oh, Zena, family just joined from Africa, going to Folly Beach. That's an excellent choice. Very nice, very, very nice. I love to hear it. That makes me so excited. Again, I know we're here on a Tuesday in the summer for an hour and a half for a webinar on grammar and conventions, which is not how most people would choose to spend their summer. So I'm glad to see that you do have some things set aside for rest and relaxation. So just, love to see that. Huge grammar nerd, Denise. Okay, excellent. Well, that makes sense then. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and keep it moving. one additional piece that I wanted to give a reminder of as you're accessing that landing page and completing the attendance for today, we've made this kind of general statement as we've done these writing sessions over the last month or so, but we'll share some like instructional resources and supports and some ideas and examples for things throughout the session. Whether throughout the presentation in general or on the landing page, or you sharing ideas with one another, but just that additional reminder that these are just some of many examples that we have for instruction and for resources and support. So when it comes to you developing your ideas for next year or planning for your curriculum and instruction, to consult your high quality instructional material. So that would be your textbook adoption, that your school or district selected those materials, just to make sure you check those as well for support. Everything that we're talking about is sort of the in addition to or to support that work. But to make sure you do check out those materials as you get them, if you have not already. I know some people have already gotten their materials and some people it's kind of on the way. So just that additional reminder. We also want to give you the reminder that we are now offering 1 hour of recertification credit for each hour of webinar participation. And in order to receive that credit, we do have 3 requirements. The first you're already doing, which is you're attending the webinar live and actively participating, whether that be through questions or breakout room. We'll do breakout rooms later. Make sure you remain in attendance for the duration of the webinar. And then, of course, make sure you complete the attendance form at the beginning. So that's on your landing page. You can go right into it if you want. And then Brenna linked it in the chat just a little while ago as well. And then at the end, we'll have a feedback form. So, oh, Jessica, I'm so glad you love the breakout rooms. We're real excited about those. We're real glad that those have been so popular. So glad to hear it. But anyway, please make sure that you complete the attendance and your feedback form. That'll let us know that you were here for the duration of the session. And then once you meet those 3 criteria, then you will have your recertification credit sent to you within the next couple of days. Additionally, we will be recording this session. It's recording right now. That recording will also be sent to you and to anyone who registered, even if they couldn't attend. And then all of the resources that we discussed will be shared with you. Typically, it takes about 7 days. I know some of you attended the narrative session about a week and a half ago. It took a little bit longer to get that recording, but we get them to you as quickly as we can. So, with all that being said, let's talk about today's purpose. So this is one of our 6 sessions on writing for high school. This is session 5 of 6. So our purposes are kind of the same each time. So today it's to enhance understanding of grammar expectations for secondary students and to provide instructional strategies to support students' ability to demonstrate a command of standard English grammar and conventions when writing. That's language from our standards. So if this is our purpose, then what is the why? Why would we take time out during the summer? And why would you come to this session in the summer to talk about grammar and student writing? I would love to hear what your why is for today. So feel free to drop it in the chat, or if you want to unmute, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Just want to know a little bit about what drew you to today's session. I see looking for some new ideas.
Am I allowed to answer vocally?
Sure.
So I used to be in private education and I authored a grammar textbook. And before I started in public education, I was sitting in a restaurant one day waiting for my child to take a practice AP exam. And this lady sat down next to me, and I don't know if anybody else here is from Greenville, but Flora Daniel is a huge employer in Greenville. And she said, "Would you please teach kids how to use proper English. She said, all these kids we hire that come into Flora Daniel, I have to spend so much time teaching them how to communicate that we can't even do our job. So I'm kind of a little bit, wondering how to make that best happen. So I grew up with really formal grammar instruction, but anyway, I'll be quiet.
Diagramming the sentences and all
Absolutely.
that
Yep.
fun stuff. Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, so and I know you said you were a grammar nerd too. I think you put that in the chat earlier. So I think you've got some kindred spirits in this session today. I'm just going back through and looking at some of the other responses as well. Grammar is imperative and being a better speaker and writer. Need to find more time for grammar instruction, making sure you're teaching the grammar skills for each grade level. And we'll definitely tap into that today, see what those expectations are for each grade level. Help students develop clarity, learn some new strategies. We'll talk about some what we call better practices for grammar instruction. Pull in some new resources. Let's see. Oh, yep, and Brenna kind of responded there. A lot of what we're doing today is talking about how to integrate grammar into the writing that students are doing, because that practical application is really what the standards say, right? Not to teach in isolation. Taking those strategies, implementing into instruction. I feel like lower grades don't focus on it enough for students to have some level of fluency as they should at the secondary levels. Then they come in and there might be some gaps or skills that might be missing. Students struggle with grammar. I think someone else said earlier, grammar can be painful depending on how we're providing that instruction. Absolutely. And we've had that conversation, Denise. I know some people definitely believe in teaching it in isolation, but we'll talk about it just in the context of the language of our standards, which is what we're actually going to start out with today. So let's jump into a quote here, and I'm not going to read the entire thing. I'm just going to leave it up on the screen for you, and just tell me, drop in the chat anything that stands out to you, anything that draws your attention. Yeah, just your initial thoughts. And how do you think it relates to what we're going to be talking about today? Nothing is complete and perfect. Writing is a work in progress. Yep, just like anything else in education, we're always learning. Okay, finding a middle ground. Yeah. Something more than just going in with that red pen and, like you said, Denise, taking off a whole letter grade for a major grammar error. Emphasis on revision, give students opportunities to revise. And that makes me really excited because our last session out of this whole series, which will be in just a couple weeks, is going to be on the last of our written and oral communication standards that applies to writing, and that's improving writing, and talking about revision and editing and the difference between those two. Students should see you constantly tweaking your writing. Oh yeah, Janessa, the growth mindset, absolutely. Always want to be better. So we were having this conversation as I was sharing. I'll give you a peek behind the curtain. Our team, we do previews for all of our PD together. So no matter what session we're hosting, we sit down together and we show our slides and we talk through it and we give each other feedback. And when I pulled up this quote and we had a conversation around it, we were really drawn to that idea of something being 100% perfect. So think about in your class with your instruction. Can students ever like make 100% in your class? Do students make 100% on anything?
Yes, for me, certain like projects, I give them a rubric and I explicitly explain everything that they need to do. And a lot of students follow the rubric and they follow exactly what I teach them. I tell them, I had experiences growing up with teachers that kind of just like, hey, here's this time, go do what you do. And I'm like, no, you need to tell me what you want and I'll give it back to you. And that's the kind of teacher that I am. And so my students really, those that pay attention, do what they need to do. They give me back exactly what I need. And so there have been opportunities for them to make 100s. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens.
Okay, absolutely. So that was something that we talked about as well, that, we've got this quote that says that, writing can never be 100% perfect, right? But there is such a thing as meeting 100% of teacher expectation. So thinking about those grade level or indicator expectations that, of course, we know that writing is always going to be a work in progress. And we want students to see that that is work, that they're constantly growing. But also, if you've set out expectation that's clear, of course, students can make 100%. Yeah. And I see a lot of you are kind of saying the same thing. Learning from mistakes, opportunities to revise. Do you have rubrics or examples of clear expectation? Absolutely. All right. So let's take that same kind of thought and build that into this next piece. So, like I said, this series that we've had over the last month and a half-ish has been on written and oral communications for high school, particularly focusing in on that written piece. So we do have 5 standards that really address writing in particular. So those first 3 sessions that we hosted, well, really the very first session, some of you may remember, was just on micro, mini, and macro writing experiences and what those were. And that was really for any grade level, just a general overview. Then we had our 3 sessions on the 3 modes of writing for English 1 through 4, which are argumentative, informative, expository, and then narrative. As we move into these next 2 sessions, the last 2 of this whole series, we're going to explore our 2 standards that support writing across all 3 modes. So just keep in mind that when we look at these last 2 standards, we're not looking at them necessarily as isolated skills, but as a component of effective writing instruction. So we will talk about, what makes something a better practice, what is included in the language of those grade level indicators, and pulling out some of that content, but then also applying it to writing that students are already doing. So just keep that in mind. It's a little bit different from what we've done in our last couple of sessions. So today we're moving into C 4.1, which is our standard for grammar and conventions. And we'll start again, like we have the last few sessions, with our pulse check. So I want to see where you're at the beginning. Hopefully, wherever you're at, we can try and move up by a degree, knowing that an hour and a half is not enough time to become an expert in anything. But as I share these statements, if you just tell me where you're at on this scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being strongly disagree and 4 being strongly agree. So first statement, I thoroughly understand the expectations for C4, which is the grammar and convention standard, for my grade level. So we know what those sub-indicators say. We know which particular skills students need to know at those grade levels. Okay, I'm seeing some 3s. I think I saw a 4 earlier. I see a 2. So a good little mix. All right. Well, as we go into these grade level indicators as well, hopefully that will clarify any sort of confusion around what expectations we have for each of those grade levels in the standards. Next statement, I'm confident in my ability to teach grammar and conventions. All right, some 3s and some 4s. Yeah, some 2s. And maybe our 4s by the end of this session today, we can move you up to a 5. Maybe you'll be ready to go and lead some professional learning on this at your school or in your district. And then last statement, I have a variety of instructional strategies to pull from when asking students to demonstrate and or practice their learning around grammar and conventions. Do you feel that you have tools in your tool kit? This one seems to have more 2s than 3s. Okay. Mostly rely on authentic student examples. Absolutely. All right. Well, again, wherever you're at in with each of those statements, hopefully we can move up by just a little bit by the end of our time together today. All right. So very first thing that we're going to start with is just talking about grammar and conventions as it applies to our standards. Obviously, there's so much that you could talk about with grammar and conventions in general, but we're focusing in on the language of our standards and what the expectations are for the individual grade levels. So what I have here at the very top of the screen is the standard or the end goal for grammar and conventions with our standard C4. And it says, demonstrate command of standard English grammar and conventions when writing. So what does that mean? When we say demonstrate command of standard English grammar and conventions when writing, what I've done here is I'm pulling the definition of conventions from our glossary. And it says the rules of composition used to make writing more clear and comprehensible. Some examples include mechanics such as spelling, punctuation, and capitalization, as well as grammatical and language features such as word order, subject-verb agreement, and verb tense. So take a look at that definition real quick. Does this definition align with your understanding and practice? Is this kind of on par with how you understand things and how you explain it to students as well? I see a thumbs up. Okay. Glad to see that we're all speaking the same language here. I always like to include definitions from the glossary since our glossary was designed to align to the intent of our indicators within our standards document. So I think I linked it on your landing page as well, just for ease of reference. But when we talk about grammar and conventions, this is what we're referring to within the language of our standards. To better understand the specific skills and content that's introduced at each grade level, what we've done is created a support document that we call the Grammar and Conventions Matrix. So the matrix, which is up here on the screen, and Brenna's going to drop it in the chat, is going to mirror the expectations for grammar within the grade level indicators for C4.1. So it's not anything different. It's just taking the expectations for the grade level indicators and putting it in a matrix format, just for clear visualization. So what I want us to do before we actually look at the grade level indicators and the vertical articulation is look at it in its conventions matrix format. So we'll take just a few minutes. I want you to open that up and just take a quick look through and share in the chat anything you notice about the matrix. What stands out to you? Think about the structure, think about the content, anything that stands out to you about the matrix. So it's 124. We'll come back together at about 127. Okay, so drop in the chat as you're looking through the matrix anything that you notice about its structure or its content. The matrix, the one that I have on the screen here is just a screenshot, but Brenna dropped the full grammar and conventions matrix in the chat. And it's on your landing page. So if you click on those, you should be able to see more information, not just these couple of pieces. All right, so I'm just taking a look back through, and I think initially what a lot of people noticed was just how much information is introduced at the elementary and then early middle levels. And then when they are coming to high school, we're focusing on refining and usage and applying all of that knowledge. So the first thing, of course, that I want to point out here is this is just a matrix format of the same information that's in the indicator. So this is not something different than the indicators. We've just taken it, we've put it in this chart so you can clearly see where skills are introduced. So we see that I, that means that that's where the skill is introduced. It doesn't necessarily mean it's where the learning stops, right? We want to reinforce information over time. But do keep in mind that with all indicators, once a skill is introduced, it can be assessed. So just make sure, you have that in mind as well. The other piece that I want to point out is this does allow for intentional instruction, but it also serves as a tool to support students who come in your class with gaps in learning. Because as many of you have said in the chat, that does happen. We have kids coming in who might have a skill that they have not yet mastered. And so this gives us an idea of where we need to step back and provide that support to get them to the grade level expectation. And some of the things that you have added in the chat, about maybe skills that you were teaching or that maybe you emphasize that really are going to be introduced at earlier grade levels. The important thing is to not just stop at that, but to get them to those grade level expectations. So
What happened?
that was just a second to look at the matrix. I wanted you to see the matrix before we actually talk about the vertical articulation, just because that's a really clear tool for looking at those expectations. But now we're going to look at the individual grade levels. So Brenna did also just put in the chat the vertical articulation for C4.1. So it's going to give you every single grade level K through English 4 with those sub indicators. So you'll see like the A, B, C, Ds. Those are going to be the individual skills that students are learning at that particular grade level. So this one we're going to take a little bit more time to dive into. And for this one, I'm going to ask you just to select a grade level to review. So not looking at it as a whole, but just picking one grade level that you teach or serve. And as you're looking at it, I want you to think about the specific expectations for grammar at that level. So what content do you see that's introduced, or just what do you generally notice about the expectations? How do those expectations align with what you or others already do? Are you doing a lot of this same work, or have things shifted a little bit from what you're typically teaching when it comes to grammar? And if so, what new learning or supports are you going to need in order to implement those grade level indicators effectively? So let's take about 5 minutes. It's 1:30. We'll come back at 1:35. Again, we're looking at C4.1, the vertical articulation that's on your landing page, and it is dropped in the chat. You can add in your comments as you're getting to them, but at 1:35, we'll come back together and kind of chat about it together. Okay, so go ahead and get started. Take about another minute. I'm seeing some great responses in the chat. Come back and share a little bit more. All right, I'm taking a look through. I'm glad to see that some of you have said you are emphasizing a lot of these same skills that we're seeing in the new standards. So not a whole lot of a drastic change. I think some of you are noting that because we're applying this in student writing and the emphasis is on creating clear writing, that there may be a need to step back and look at some of those previously introduced skills and make sure we're still reinforcing those, right? We don't just want to assume they did that, they know it, I'm not touching it, right? But where do we see a need for reinforcement of previously learned skills? Let's see. Felicia, I see your comment on vocabulary. We actually have 3 vocabulary standards, which are within our applications of reading strand. But that makes me wonder if maybe that's something that we can emphasize through some additional professional learning or webinars in the fall and really bring vocabulary to the forefront and
Yeah,
basic
Casey,
writing.
That would
sorry,
be
not to,
great.
sorry.
Let me just add this. Back, different districts do different things. And I learned in one of the former districts, they spent a heavily amount of time on STEMs. And I used to think, oh God, it's so tedious, but literally it's the easiest way to teach kids vocabulary. So maybe there's something that districts can incorporate, because I use STEMs, the word within a word, how to break it down, prefixes and all that stuff, especially when you get cold text. So to me, that and context clues are what help my English 2 students when they do the EOC, because thank God they've done extremely well on it. And that I really attribute to breaking down words using STEM. So I was just saying that vocabulary is important to be doing throughout.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that gives me some ideas for the fall as I'm thinking about our upcoming webinars and what we can do to support, especially at the high school level. So thank you for that.
And Casey, I
yeah.
was gonna add, AOR 9 is that morphology, that Greek and Latin roots standard, but all of the modes of writing, specific communications 1, 2, and 3, also mention vocabulary specific to the modes of writing. So that if you weren't able to attend our sessions on the specific modes of writing, you may find those to be beneficial as far as vocabulary inclusion goes.
We have all of the resources from all of our previous writing sessions are on your landing page. Y'all, your landing page has gotten bigger and bigger each week because we just keep taking everything from the previous sessions and just like adding it to the bottom. So there's a lot to navigate there, but there are plenty of resources. Louise, I see you have your hand up. You have a question, Louise? Okay. But let me keep taking a look here. I did see someone note that there are very broad expectations at English 4. And of course, that's because at that point, they're applying the knowledge of all those previously learned skills. Some of you are noting there are some things that we have as an expectation at certain levels that we're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about that. Or I was going back and doing X, Y, and Z, right? But really they need to be here and might give you some areas to emphasize. And that takes me to a little bit of a point that I wanted to bring up that I've seen in the chat as well. Speaking from experience as a high school English teacher, I often found myself focusing on skills that were really meant to be mastered at previous levels. Like I taught 9th grade for a really long time and I was doing parts of speech every single year, right? Like we're reviewing the parts of speech, which is fine, right? Like hear me say that when students are struggling or they're presenting gaps, we should be going back and reteaching or providing support around specific skills. Where I went wrong though, is I went back to those skills or concepts, but then I never moved them closer to the grade level expectation, right? So for me, looking at these expectations and seeing where kids are supposed to be at, kind of was a little bit of a wake up call just to make sure that, of course, we're providing the support, but we're also making sure students have access to the grade level indicators. We don't ever want to stunt any growth or not provide them with the opportunity to have access to on grade level skills. Okay, Brenna, I see you dropped. Oh no, Jessica, you dropped the landing page. Thank you. I'm just taking another look through. Yep, and then those later grade levels, many of you are mentioning, we're just reinforcing skills that have been previously learned. Absolutely, with an emphasis on refinement, right? We want students to be able to refine their writing through their knowledge of grammar and conventions. All right, so what we're going to do now is take a look through some of the major shifts or noticings in those grade levels from grade to grade. So we're not going to spend a million years on this because it's not going to be a representation of the complete indicator, but what I've done here is kind of taken some of the major noticings from grade to grade and put those in. So taking a look here from 8th grade to English 1, what are some kind of changes or shifts or noticings that draw your attention? And feel free to drop it in the chat or unmute. Anything that draws your attention here about the grade level indicator shifts or noticings from 8th grade to English 1. Yep, so 8th grade, they're talking about active and passive voice. We don't necessarily see that in English 1. We see used verbs with appropriate mood and tone, connotation of verbs, more rigorous use of grammar and of punctuation. So we see there's some differences in the punctuation that is introduced in English 1, absolutely. So a couple of things to kind of draw your attention to here as well. Of course, make sure that you're referring to the glossary for clarification around indicator language like mood and tone. The other thing that, oh yeah, revision knowledge or knowledge of revision. And this isn't the first time that they're seeing it. What they're doing here now is applying the knowledge. And I'll get to that in just a second. One thing I did want to point out though, when it comes to the glossary is terms like colon and semicolon and hyphen are not in the glossary. That is because they're really is sort of a standard definition of what a comma is and what a colon is, and how they're used, whereas the glossary really is meant to provide clarity around specific indicator language, if that makes sense. Like a comma is a comma and a capitalization is a capitalization. But when we talk about mood and tone and how that relates to indicator language, we want to clarify that. Yes, the apply knowledge of, when you see that term, that means that students are applying all previously learned concepts. So if, let's say it's capitalization, in every other grade level earlier, there would be the rules for capitalization, and then apply knowledge of means we've learned all of those rules for capitalization within the language of our indicators, and now we're just applying everything. But that's where you want to refer to that grammar and conventions matrix to see where grammar concepts were introduced or where they were reinforced. For example, colons and hyphens. When we see colons and hyphens here, I have them in red. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the first time students are using them. So those may have been introduced in previous grade levels. You want to make sure you go back and take a look. Now looking English 1 to English 2. What sort of noticings, I was gonna say, what sort of noticings do you notice? It's that kind of day. But what's drawing your attention here? And I'm trying to take a look at the chat as I'm giving a little bit of time for y'all to digest as well. Jessica, I love what you said about taking sort of a temperature check at the beginning of the year, figure out what they know, what they don't know, and where you might need to fill in gaps. Denise, I have summer brain, and I don't even have a summer break. I am just, yeah. Parallel structure can be a difficult concept. Yeah, and until they see models of it and apply it, yeah, it's going to be difficult. I see the dash. Y'all have brought in the dash. Y'all, that is some complicated punctuation that we're bringing in the later grades. Choice of connecting ideas and parallel structure. Yep, absolutely. The other piece here that I wanted to point out, so we talked about the semicolon in English 1 with a conjunctive adverb, and what's been added here with the semicolon is the semicolon or conjunctive adverb to connect related independent clauses. So again, same thing, we want to refer to the glossary for clarification around indicator language like revise. And parallel structure. We do have definitions for those. Revise is really important because there is a difference between revision and editing in our standards. And that we're going to spend a whole other hour and a half in a couple of weeks talking about, but just making sure we have clarity around those terms. Same thing, referring to the grammar and conventions matrix to see where concepts were introduced. So parallel structure, we see it in red here. It's actually introduced in our standards in middle school. So it's introduced at an earlier level, and that is why it's been added here to applying knowledge, because they're going to continue to build those skills over time. So this won't be the first time they're seeing it. What about this? English 2 to English 3. There's a pretty big noticing here. What draws your attention between English 2 and 3? Capitalization and punctuation, broad wording. Yeah. And again, this is not like that what I have here for English 3, that's not the full indicator language, right? That's just the biggest noticing is that applying knowledge of capitalization and punctuation. So I have gotten that question in the field in the refinement time, Erin. I love that. That's what I'm going to start calling it. It's refinement time once we hit English 3. Love that. Yeah, so we're learning new skills with punctuation. All the way up to English 2. Yeah, so we're learning, we're still working with colons and dashes and semicolons in English 2. By the time they get to English 3, they're not learning any more new information around punctuation. They're now applying. And going back again to all of those previously learned skills. And focusing, yep, same thing, focusing on application. Okay, so the inappropriate shifts in verb tense, number, voice, mood, and parallel structure, right? From English 2, again, working on how we revise things and why we revise them. And same thing, apply knowledge means we are applying all previously learned concepts. That means we're not learning any new skills, we're just going back and reinforcing. And of course, refer to the grammar and conventions matrix so we can see where concepts were introduced. So all the different types of punctuation, it's going to kind of go in that diagonal all the way to English 2, and then English 3, now we're applying it. Okay, and then one thing that I didn't put here, but it is within the language of the sub-indicators, is in English 2, there is a sub-indicator that says select and use verbs with appropriate mood and tone. That one is no longer explicitly stated in English 3, so you're going to see there's a different number of sub-indicators. So it's no longer explicitly stated, but of course we want to make sure we're reinforcing the skills. And then lastly, English 3 to English 4. What noticings do we have here? Anything that draws your attention for this shift from grade to grade? English 4, yeah, English 4 is much more broad. And again, this is just me pulling a couple of pieces, not giving you the full indicator. But yes, we can see that apply knowledge of to revise has now kind of gone from a whole list of things to sentence fragments and run-on sentences. But of course, we're still applying all of that previously learned information. Again, it's just the refinement. of knowledge. So nothing, too crazy. We're applying knowledge of all of those skills. And this is where you might want to also consider opportunities for instructional extensions beyond the grade level indicator. So this isn't everything in all of grammar and conventions to exist, right? We're talking about specific skills for specific grade levels, but depending on what you're doing in your class, there may be additional skills that students need to learn. Or may need to have some experience with. So consider those opportunities where you could extend instructionally beyond the grade level indicator, but just making sure that if you're doing that, that you're using formative assessment and feedback to guide that work. So yeah, think beyond, think what students may need specifically within the context of your instruction. Yep, and I'm seeing a lot of you say, we're reinforcing at this point. Consistent feedback, see models, write their own, improve their own writing. And I'm so glad you're saying that, Erin, because that is the next piece that we're going to talk about, are some better practices for how we can provide some instruction around grammar. So before we move any further, we're going to do a little bit of a wrap up of this section with an activity that I call core reporting. So in 1 to 3 words, how would you describe your takeaways from this section? 1 to 3 words. So I could do a little pulse check and see where we're at. I see basics by 8th, intentional articulation, refine my focus, defining grammar expectations, intentional progression, streamline expectation, improving communication, reteaching and refining, application, reinforce. Okay, so we're all on the same page. That makes me so happy. Yeah. So we're really focusing on sort of what we need to do at our particular grade level, but being mindful of those previous levels, and emphasizing that refinement of skills, as we've talked about with so many of our other standards, right? By the time they're reaching high school, we want to start refining those skills. Yep, absolutely. Excellent. All right. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about something that we call 8 better practices for grammar instruction. So we're going to kind of go through some of these, and then we're going to take some time afterwards to apply using our micros, minis, and macros. So we've talked about this in a few sessions before, and when we did our road show in the fall with our whole team, we actually shared this article and took time to read it and talk about it. So we put it on your landing page, but it's something that really rings true for us here in our team. And it's what's better than a best practice. So I've just pulled a little quote here from the article. It says, if you truly want to be the best, you've got to realize that practice implies not perfection, but an ongoing habit of working to improve. And the term best implies an absolute. So best practices is really an oxymoron. We on our team don't like to say best practice. We like to say a better practice, because we know there's always room for improvement. We should continually be growing. And if we say something is the best, that means that there's not really anywhere else that it can go. So we're going to share what we're calling better practices, but they're not exhaustive. And they're something that we've kind of taken from a resource and sort of built upon. So they're just a few ideas to get you and the teachers that you work with or serve thinking about how to support grammar instruction in meaningful ways. So just remember, we're talking about a better practice here, not necessarily the best. If it were the best, there'd be no way we could improve. So we're going to share 8 what we're calling better instructional practices. We actually gathered these from an article, which is also on your landing page if you want a little bit more information, but we're going to kind of do a dive into each of them. The first being to teach grammar with authentic writing. The second, focus on usage over terminology. Teach and assess one skill at a time. Scaffold learning through practice and instruction. Engage with high interest mentor texts. Model concepts. emphasize sentence combining, and don't mark every error. So a lot of you have said some of these things already in the chat. So we're going to kind of go into each one and talk about it. So as we do, I want you to consider practice versus strategy. So I was at a conference last week and it was a totally different context, but I heard a phrase that I've kind of taken and I'm adapting for this session. So that is date the strategy, but marry the practice. So as we talk about some of these different practices, and we get into like the micros, minis, and macros later, and we share some different instructional strategies, right? We kind of date the strategy, right? We try it out, like we see if it works for us, it's great, and if it's not, then it's not. But the thing that we really want to marry is what the practice is. So it's not so much this activity, but it's the practice of modeling concepts, right? Or it's not this text in particular, but it's the practice of using high interest mentor text. So I just want us to keep that in mind as we kind of start talking about some different strategies, but also practices. And one way that we can engage through this will be through triangle, square, circle. So as we talk about these practices, you have an opportunity to share 3 important ideas you can take away, something that squares up or matches with your thinking, or what is still circling in your head. So with that being said, let's talk about some better practices. The first one, again, being teach grammar with authentic writing. And we found a quote. It said, young writers should learn to edit their own work, for who knows better what the intention for the reader is than the writer. So I would love to hear in the chat or unmute, do you already teach grammar with authentic writing? And how do you teach grammar with authentic writing? I mean, we've got a whole group of experts from around the state sitting in this virtual space right now. I want to hear, do you do this? How do you do it? Is there something that you can share for the good of the group? And again, you can drop it in the chat or you can unmute. Try to use the micro mentors. Okay, authentic writing. So that's a great point. We had this same discussion. So when we talk about authentic writing, what we're saying is that it involves having students write in their own voice to real world audiences on significant topics for genuine purposes, like informing, persuading, debating, or presenting solutions. That could take lots of different formats, like in our grade level entrance statements. That could be an article, a letter, a book, an interview, a business report. So just giving students an opportunity to practice those skills in writing scenarios that are authentic, that could connect students to the outside world, helps them make meaningful connections, generally just real life context. Okay, tend to do this more when you have really good opportunities. Use students writing and create mini lessons in the workshop model format to address common grammar issues. I totally get that, Denise. So you need to be able to single out what the specific issue, if they don't understand that information, then it's not going to necessarily help them. Peer review with a single focus, then add another focus and apply to the same writing. Provide examples, bulleted list for revision or peer editing. Oh, Erin, I like that. Students' written response can also tell you a great deal about how well they're meeting their reading standards. So it's important not to isolate the two worlds. I see peer editing a good bit. Lots of peer review. Emphasizing that students are writing for a wider audience, not just you as the teacher. And that goes back to so much of the information in the first 3 standards for the 3 modes of writing, that they need to make intentional decisions based on their audience and purpose and task. Absolutely. All right, so a little bit of a why here, because we've tried to add a little bit of a why, is that practical application, of course, helps new learning stick. When we give them opportunities to apply that in a way that is real or authentic, it's going to help them retain that information. Second, better practice would be focusing on usage over terminology. And this says for long-term learning to take hold, students must build on the simulated practice by taking that practice and integrating it into their own writing. So a lot of what you were already saying, right? And again, that same reason, new information has to be processed and practiced in order to be stored into long-term memory, right? So we think about all those times you've ever had to take an exam and you just memorized and memorized and memorized a date or a definition or something, and you regurgitated it for that one time. And then what happened as soon as you got up from that chair? It's gone, right? I cannot tell you anything about Bacon's Rebellion or whatever it is, right, that I had to study for 20 years ago. But if I've had to apply information, then it's in there and it's not going anywhere. So giving students opportunities for actual usage and not just learning, you know, a term or a definition. Oh, yes, they do absolutely need the appropriate common vocabulary, but of course, we want to make sure that they still have the opportunities to apply it. Oh, I see that students creative projects to apply their information. Very important for vertical articulation conversations, making sure to reinforce those previously taught concepts. Yes, so it's not just what is a comma, right? We want to know what a comma is, but how do you use a comma? All right, teach and assess one skill at a time. So this one, when it comes to grammar and mechanics, we probably can't teach it all without deluging students with so much that they remember nothing. So we need to go very deep with fewer concepts. So this doesn't necessarily mean that all instruction needs to be in isolation, right? But what we're saying here is that when students are learning new skills, it's important that they have the opportunity to focus on the specific aspects of that skill and then receive more targeted instruction and feedback. And then once they've demonstrated the mastery of those skills, then they should be combined in meaningful ways, right? So by concentrating on one writing skill at a time, they can receive all of that, then move from one to the next. Right? So making sure that we're providing opportunities to really master each skill by teaching and assessing it before moving on to the next piece. I'm seeing rubric components for particular assignments can highlight a grammar skill to be assessed on. Absolutely. And that goes along with maybe not marking every single error if we're focusing on one particular skill at a time. Scaffolding kind of falls into that same thing, right? Here with a quote, sometimes in life we have to slow down so we can speed up later. Writing instruction is no different. When we take it slow in the beginning, we're setting ourselves and our students up for faster, better work in the future. So it's connecting back to that idea of teaching and assessing one skill at a time when students are developing new skills. And then once they've mastered those, they can more easily be able to draw on that prior knowledge to better connect to new skills. So think about it like building a skyscraper. If one floor isn't complete, you can't build to the next one, right? We don't want to just have a sprinkling of one thing and then move on to the next. And then same thing here. So scaffolding grammar instruction helps students develop a framework of knowledge and skills that they can build upon. Can be beneficial for students at all levels, helps them make connections to prior knowledge, take a more active, independent role in their learning, and build self-efficacy and minimize frustration. All right, engage with high interest mentor texts. So I love this quote. The idea is to begin with the end in mind. Knowing what successful writing looks like helps students produce more effective sentences. So when we give students an opportunity to read with an eye for specific skills, it helps them internalize those practices and develop positive habits in their writing. So how many of you, when you were in school, had the sentence on the board that had all the spelling errors or the punctuation errors or the whatever, and you spent however much time at the beginning of class talking about what was wrong with the sentence? Right. I mean, we've all done it. Absolutely. Which is not to say that we don't want to teach students how to revise things where there are errors, right? But we want to also provide opportunities for students to see good habits and good work in action, not just internalize the information that's wrong, right? What can I do that's right? Where do I see a positive example of this? This is where you might see some things within the micros, minis, macros that we'll share later in your high quality instructional materials, and in your, plans that you build within your school or district. So just making sure students have opportunities to engage with that high interest mentor text, to see positive examples of using those skills in action. Sentence stalking. Yeah, I love that. You may have also heard of like the author's palette, where you take specific skills and you kind of capture them in quotes as a palette of different examples that you can draw from. Modeling concepts with think alouds. So talking a little bit about modeling, with this quote, modeling by writing in front of the class, examining writing together, and looking for samples of children's writing is very different from just telling students something and expecting them to go off and do it. Right? So this one, you've heard us probably talk about John Hattie's work with visible learning. We talk about effect sizes, and teacher modeling is considered to have a significantly positive influence on student learning and achievement, with an effect size of like 0.62 or something like that. Like it's pretty high. So providing opportunities to model positive practice. And I've included here, and we kind of talked about this together too, in our team, is modeling concepts, but not just with visual processes, right? So considering your think alouds or some other form of modeling. And I will pause here to ask, how do you model practices in your class? Do you model it in ways other than visual? Aaron, I love that you said teacher vulnerability is great. Ask for specific skills from choice novels. Oh, okay, Madonna, you said when teaching English 4, start with a sentence or paragraph and ask students to help them complete the prompt as a whole group or in small groups. Right. Not everything needs to be done individually. Providing opportunities to work together to create something, I think, would be a great way to model concepts. Group writing, talk it out, workshop, audio examples. I love all these ideas. All right, emphasizing sentence combining. Okay, so our quote here says, there are seemingly a million different ways to convey messages and write out our thoughts. Knowing the ins and outs of syntax is at the heart of learning how to become a strong writer. I think someone mentioned syntax earlier, so I'm so glad that we have a quote here that addresses that. So combining sentences would be an opportunity for students to take a series of shorter sentences, like declarative sentences, and find meaningful ways to combine them into more extensive and complex sentences. And that helps students to better understand syntax and to build knowledge of phrases, clauses, conjunctions, linking punctuation, and then helps their writing become more fluent and sophisticated. So whether that be through specific mentor text examples or through student samples, providing opportunities and showing students how to combine sentences can be a really positive way for them to learn those skills in practice. Oh, and I like that. Understanding of transition words is key. Yep, love that. All right, last one. Don't mark every error. Did you ever have a teacher who used the red pen on your paper, and you got it back and the whole thing just problem after problem, you know, all the errors or the notes about what was wrong? Did it positively influence your work moving forward? Did that make, like, how did that make you feel as a as a student? Right. Looked like the paper was bleeding, depended on the teacher. Right. So think about it this way, right? This quote right here, oh yeah, it makes you scared, right? Why would I want to turn something in? I know it's gonna be wrong, and I know, you know, all I'm gonna see is, oh, seeing red. Oh my gosh, I love that. Um, this quote, I think, hits the nail on the head. Fixing papers doesn't teach much about using grammar, it just breeds dependence, right? All we're getting is just a list of everything that's wrong. And if we mark every error, it shifts attention away from practicing the learned skills, the content of the writing, and positive aspects of student work. So think about that, teaching and assessing one skill at a time. Think about, I think there was an example here that someone put in earlier of like, maybe we have one specific skill that we're going to focus on with this particular draft, right? This is what we're emphasizing. This is what we're checking for. And think about kind of what you're emphasizing first, right? Are you emphasizing the grammar, or are you emphasizing the content of the writing the first time around, right? Because it's easy to see the grammatical mistakes. Those are easy, right? This is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But are we focusing on the content or the positive aspects as well? And I love that some of you are mentioning things like maybe student conferences or writing conferences where you can sit one-on-one with students and go through their work. And then, oh yeah, felt as if you'd failed, even if you hadn't failed the assignment, right? You see all those errors, and it kind of changes how you feel about the work that you're submitting, right? So we want to make sure we're emphasizing the right things. Put the issue in the margin, responsible for finding the error in that line. Focus skill grading is priority, so not to overwhelm students with corrections. Absolutely, absolutely. So I know we're going to do the triangle, circle, square, but I wanted to try and make sure we had enough time to get to our last couple activities. So I think a lot of you were already sharing response in the chat. I've seen some great ideas here. But are there any other takeaways that you wanted to share, whether it be a triangle, a square, circle, any important points, anything that squares up or matches your thinking or your practice, or something that's still circling in your mind about this section as a whole? And feel free to drop it in the chat before we do our last little section. So takeaways, anything that aligned with your thinking or practice. Circling, how can this information inform my elementary teachers and coaches that you support? And Mandy, I mean, there's so many skills that they're learning in elementary school, right? There's a lot that they may need to kind of build some background on, focus the rubric on a particular skill, write positive comments in the margin. And yeah, I mean, if you have a strong background in grammar, it's hard to not look at and see every single thing that needs to be fixed. Don't underestimate the value of thinking aloud and teacher modeling. Oh, absolutely. Conventions and grammar shouldn't impede the reader to understand and connect with the text. Remember to assess what the instructional focus was. Make an effort to integrate reading and writing rather than teaching everything in isolation. Squares with your current schema. Toolbox containing fanboys. Okay. I'm so glad that there are some takeaways here. How can you support secondary teachers with changing their perspectives about grading grammar? April, when you find the answer to that, I would love to hear it. Because that is it. That can be a mountain. Absolutely. What steps do you need to take to move away? Oh, into more authentic examples. Yeah. Yeah, instead of just the daily grammar. Fixing all errors breeds dependence. build a community of writers. Don't always concentrate on what's wrong. Pay attention to what's right. Oh, I'm so glad you like the author's palette. Excellent. So I'm going to move us on to our micros, minis, and macros so we have a good bit of time to discuss these. And if you have not, I know a lot of you have attended all of these sessions or multiple of these, but just as a general reminder, when we talk about micro, mini, and macro experiences, what we're talking about are writing experiences that take with micros less than one class period, minis being 1 to 2 class periods, macros being culminating products, just so students have ample experience with writing in lots of different contexts for lots of different lengths and purposes, and not just focusing on kind of that essay end product, because we know the grade level indicators and the standards don't say that that has to necessarily be the end goal. It can be one of the goals. I mean, I like to call it a yes and, right? Yes, we want them to do this, and we want them to have lots of other experiences. And over the last 3 sessions, we've shared a lot of micros, minis, and macros with you, examples for each of the modes of writing at all grade levels. And we're going to take a look at those in just a little bit. When we talk about instructional strategies versus writing experiences, the micros, minis, and macros are writing experiences. They're not what we would call an instructional strategy, because students still need to have the explicit writing instruction. The micros, minis, and macros are just suggestions that you can use when it's time for students to demonstrate their understanding of and/or practice what you've taught. So I want us to go back to the language of the indicators. And here I'm pulling an example from English 2. This is C4.1. This is the same standard that we've been talking about this whole time. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things here, because the language of the standard says for students to use their grammar and their understanding of grammar and conventions in writing, right? And to make intentional decisions about standard English grammar and conventions, right? So we're talking about students being able to apply these skills within their writing. So we're not separating it out with new micros, minis, and macros. In fact, what we're about to do is talk about how we can take our micros, minis, and macros and revise them to include some of that intentional grammar instruction. So we're going to talk about an English 1 example. I'm going to show you how I can take one of the micros, minis, macros that already exists and revise it to include that intentional grammar instruction using those better practices. So what we're going to do is, in just a moment after I show you this example, we'll give you a chance to select a grade level, review the micros, minis, macros, and then use the grade level indicator language and the 8 better practices to think about how you could adjust a micro, mini, macro to include that grammar piece. So the example that I'm going to pull is for English 1. So let's say I look at the grade level indicator for English 1. And out of that, there are all of those sub-indicators about skills, but the one that I pulled out was use appropriate parallel structure in words, phrases, and clauses, because I know that one is a tricky one. Y'all said parallel structure can be tricky for students. The better practice that I'm going to pull here is engage with high interest mentor text. So I want students to be able to see an example, a good example of how you can use parallel structure. So I go into the micros, minis, and macros, and I see there's an English 3 micro called targeted rewrites, and I'm going to take that and adjust it for English 1. So there, in that example, there is an example of how you can rewrite a claim using parallel structure. So it gives me the example. So I'm going to provide that claim statement to my students. We're going to discuss the parallel structure using the example that's provided. How did that revision help make the claim clearer, or more detailed, or more interesting, or whatever we want to talk about? And then have them revise a new simple claim statement to include parallel structure. So we're giving the model, we're talking about what makes it a good example, and then we're going to take another claim and we're going to revise that claim to then be parallel. And it could even be a claim for a piece of writing that that they're already doing, right? Maybe they're writing some sort of argumentative piece and we're taking their own claim and they're rewriting it. So that's just an example of how I could take a micro, mini, macro and adjust it to then include that intentional piece about parallel structure. But you're going to have an opportunity to do the same. So in just a minute, I think Mandy is setting you up for your breakouts. We're going to take just like 5 minutes. I mean, not anything really crazy. Just about 5 minutes in a small group. And you're going to do that same thing. So I want you to think about a grade level, using that vertical articulation, pick one skill out of there. Look at the micros, minis, and macros that Brenna's going to drop in the chat. And it's going to have every single micro, mini, macro that we've already shared with you from the previous 3 sessions. So instead of creating new micro, mini, macros, we want you to think how you can take one of those and adjust it to include that instruction for that particular concept. All right. Mandy, are you good to go? All right, so we'll come back in about 5 minutes and then we'll put these instructions in the chat for you to reference. Okay, any questions? All right, let's go ahead and pop everyone out. Brenna, could you take these 3 bullets and drop them like in the chat? And I know that was kind of like quick instruction. All right, let me see if I can jump in a room.
Hey, I was just waiting here to see if anybody else hopped in and I needed to assign them.
I'm back. I'm gonna give them just another like minute or so because I know they really haven't had a whole lot of time to get into the activity. I think they were still sort of orienting themselves. But if you want to take, maybe, do you want to maybe, is there a way we can put in the chat for each room that oh, there you go. Okay. How did you do that?
On my end, for the breakout rooms, there's an announcement button.
Okay. Gotcha.
What time would you like me to close?
28. And Brenna, I like your idea. I know this was more of like an informal. When I was popping in, I was telling them if this just ends up being an informal chat, that's fine. Honestly, we would have, if we had had more time, that would have been the redo. But this could be like a fall, let's get back together, and have a more extensive discussion around this. Y'all feel good about that? Hey, y'all.
Hello.
That you could use that.
All right, so
We were still
Better
talking.
practice now.
can y'all see my screen? There I am.
No.
Okay. Can y'all see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'll give you full disclosure. That was not enough time to really dive into anything at all. I totally understand. But as we were kind of chatting and going from room to room, we got the idea that maybe this might be something that sort of breakout with these activities. I'm wondering if that could be like a workshop kind of thing that we do in the fall and get everyone together and take more time to do this extensively. And since y'all are all here, was that something that you would be interested in if I were to like offer an actual work time in the fall to go through all of this together? Okay, perfect.
Absolutely.
So, okay, excellent. So I know again that wasn't a whole lot of time. It was just enough time for you to get in the room and maybe find one document. But I would love to take a little bit more time for us to come back together and do this a little bit more in depth. And it looks like y'all are kind of on the same page. Well, thank you for being flexible on that. Okay, so again, the idea here was just to get you thinking about the micros, minis, macros, and that grade level expectation for grammar. So taking one of those skills and instead of creating brand new micros, minis, macros, we're thinking about how we can embed that grammar within the writing that students are doing. And I see that idea bringing maybe a different kind of eminence. Yeah, absolutely. So just taking some different ideas and sharing them together. Okay, fabulous. So that I will start thinking about. All right, so we are almost at time. So for clarity and closure, again, our goal today was to enhance understanding of the expectation for grammar for secondary students, provide instructional strategies to support students' ability to demonstrate command of standard English grammar and conventions when writing. So if you would please share, how do you think this purpose was met? Or do you think the purpose was met? Hopefully, you feel like at least part of our purpose was met for today. Let me know in the chat. Gain some clarity around student expectations. Understanding is much deeper. Well, thank you, Madonna. Enjoyed the better practices, having some discussion around the better practices. Yeah, and if I could at least have you have an awareness that we have a grammar and conventions matrix and focus you in on the grade level indicators and the expectations, and talk a little bit about some of those different practices and how we might shift our thinking around instruction for grammar. I think that could be, then that was a success for me. All right, we're gonna do our pulse check one more time. First being, I thoroughly understand the expectations for C4 for my grade level. I'm seeing some 3.5s, 4s. Hopefully we've moved up at least a little bit from where we were. I'm still looking through the chat. I'm seeing some great things. Okay, and for some of you, it's giving you an idea of where you might need to grow, or maybe in some cases find additional support. Possible to focus on one skill when writing and not correct every error. Using the writing to help the learners practice the skills. Excellent. All right. Do you feel confident in your ability to teach grammar and conventions? Excellent. And then need to convince some of your teachers. I know for some people it's a little bit of a mindset shift. And if you support teachers, maybe at a school or district level, those are some big discussions. Absolutely. Last but not least, variety of instructional strategies to pull from when asking students to demonstrate and or practice their learning around grammar and conventions. And this is where those better practices, as well as some of those micros, minis, and macros may come into play. Now, with a little bit more time, we could definitely take some of those and do some intentional planning around those, but hopefully you feel like you've got some pieces that you can build off of. Absolutely. So I'm glad to see that there's some growth. That makes me happy. Oh, let me go back here. Okay, so to end our session, I am going to ask for some feedback. Your feedback form is that last piece for us to confirm your participation for your recertification. So please make sure that you complete that. I think Brenna's going to drop it in the chat for you. And as a reminder, we have one more webinar in our summer secondary writing series. So that is going to be on improving writing for English 1 through 4, which is going to talk about revision and editing. We're going to talk about the difference between those. That is going to be on July 22nd. It was originally July, it was sometime next week. We've had to adjust the date because we've had some different meetings that we're gonna be in. Feedback form is closed. Let's see. Brenna, I think you put in the one for last week. The feedback form for last week. Let me take a look.
I used the one that was in the speaker note. Did I? Yeah.
Here, the other one's in that summer document. I got it. Don't worry, y'all, I'm getting it. All right. If you, and let me put the link again in the chat. All right. Try it now and see if it works. You can just give me a thumbs up if it's good now. Okay, perfect. I'm gonna stop the recording and then we're gonna linger and listen so you can fill out the feedback form. But if you have like questions or comments or anything, we can help with that too. But let me stop the recording. Once you've completed your feedback form, if you don't have any questions or comments or anything, or you don't want to linger and listen and hang out with us, then you're good to go. And I appreciate your time so much. So once you're done and you're good to go, then you can head on out. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and an excellent weekend.
Casey, I think we have a hand raised.
Okay, yes.